If you're seeing this, my dear fellow wanderer in the cosmic mist, it may be because something inside you, something ancient and playful, something wiser than all the thoughts you've ever collected, has finally grown tired of being prey. Not prey in the dramatic, animalistic sense. No, but prey to ideas, to fears, to the relentless chase of your own mind trying to capture itself, like a dog spinning after its own tail, never realizing the dance was the point and not the capture. And if this finds you now, it is because the universe has such impeccable comedic timing. It's funny like that. It waits until you've exhausted every possible route of self-sabotage, every labyrinth of overthinking, every convincing illusion you could build about who you think you are, before whispering, "Are you done? Can we begin?" There is a peculiar relief in realizing that your mind has grown tired of being hunted by its own shadows. It is like watching a wave realize it is not separate from the sea. For the longest time, we believe the wave is being pushed around by forces larger than itself: wind, gravity, currents, the great pull of the moon. But once the wave remembers it is the ocean, everything becomes delightfully simple. The drama dissolves into a kind of shimmering humor. You notice that what you feared was merely the echo of your own voice, bouncing inside a small room you mistook for the whole universe. You see, what we call fear, or self-doubt, or anxiety is often the mind's misunderstanding of its own nature. The mind thinks it must protect itself from life, never realizing it is life. Just as the whirlpool thinks it is separate from the river, forgetting it is simply the river swirling in a particular shape. When you begin to notice this, a fascinating thing happens. The hunter and the hunted vanish together. They were both costumes worn by consciousness during a playful masquerade. And now, at this very moment, perhaps you've become tired of wearing the mask. There is a kind of ripening that happens silently over years without your permission, like fruit slowly softening under sunlight. Something inside you gives way to a deeper understanding, not logical understanding, but an intuitive, bodily knowing that comes unannounced, like a breeze sneaking into an open window. You realize that life has never once demanded that you be afraid. That was your own performance. Delightful, dramatic, convincing, but still a performance. And the moment you recognize this, the script drops from your hands, and you laugh. Oh, how you laugh. Because it is exquisitely funny to see how seriously we take the theater of our imagination. If you're seeing this, perhaps the laughter is already rising in your chest. A little embarrassed at how long you believed the shadows were real. But that embarrassment is tender. Sweet, like waking from a dream where you were running and running and running, only to find you were lying safely in your bed the whole time. Life is always like this. It terrifies you with phantoms that, once awakened from, you find charming rather than threatening. The mind is done being prey, not because it has become stronger in the way we normally use the word strength, but because it has become softer, more spacious, more fluid. That is the paradox. True strength is like water. Try to grasp it and you get nothing. Try to cut it and you only tire yourself. Try to control it and you become exhausted long before it does. Water wins by yielding. It perseveres by surrendering. And so does the awakened mind, not by becoming rigid, but by becoming free. People often ask me, "Alan, how do I stop being afraid?" And I always chuckle, not to mock the question, but because the question itself contains the seed of its own undoing. To ask how to stop being afraid is already to assume fear is an enemy, something you must push away. But fear, my friend, is simply a wave in the mind. And the harder you resist it, the more it grows teeth. It is like trying to push away your reflection in a pond. The more you disturb the water, the more distorted and monstrous the reflection becomes. But if you become still, then the entire pond clears, and you see that the monster was nothing but a trembling in your own perception. Perhaps that stillness is why you're here now. Something in you grew tired of running. Something in you stopped splashing the water. Something in you finally said, enough. And in that moment, your mind began to unlearn its identity as prey. What a peculiar word. Prey. It suggests something hunted, something vulnerable, something always on the lookout for danger. But danger real, danger is rare. What you've been prey to most of your life is the thought of danger. An imagined future, a fictional criticism, an internal voice that sounds very important but holds no authority in the true parliament of your being. When we talk about enlightenment, we're not talking about becoming a special kind of person. We're talking about dissolving the person altogether, letting the boundaries soften until you realize you are not this little I rattling around inside your skull. You are the space in which the I appears, the awareness behind the thoughts, the silence underneath the symphony. And once you glimpse even a fraction of this, you can no longer be prey, because there is nothing left to be hunted. Have you ever watched a cat sitting by the window? It stares at the world with this perfect poise present, unafraid, alert, but at ease. It isn't strategizing or worrying or imagining worst-case scenarios. It doesn't ask itself, am I enough? A cat has never once in the history of the universe doubted its worth. It simply is, and that is precisely why it moves with such grace. When you become like that, when your presence is no longer cluttered with frantic attempts to protect the ego, you begin to live with a natural elegance, a soft but undeniable power. Power not as domination, but as freedom. The mind that is done being prey does not roar or thrash or conquer. It simply stops treating its own illusions as enemies. Suddenly, the whole game changes. Instead of battling with your thoughts, you begin to observe them as clouds drifting across the sky of awareness. They come, they go, they form interesting shapes, and sometimes they thunder, but they never alter the sky itself. You are that sky, boundless, untouched, eternally open. And here is the delightful cosmic joke. The moment you realize this, all the things you once thought were hunting, you lose interest. Criticism, rejection, judgment, uncertainty. These predators starve when you stop feeding them your attention. They only survive in the narrow corridors of an over-identified ego. But the spacious self, the true self, the one that watches without clinging, walks through the world like a breeze through trees, uncatchable, unbothered, immensely alive. You may think awakening comes with fireworks or angelic choirs or some dramatic shift, but it rarely does. It comes quietly, like a tide rising at night. You don't notice it until suddenly your feet are wet, and you look around to find the landscape has transformed. That is what is happening to you now. In this very moment, your awareness is rising, gently but steadily, washing away the old patterns that once convinced you they were unbreakable. Life is not asking you to fight. It is inviting you to float, to dance, to join the great cosmic rhythm that is always playing, whether you listen or not. And when you stop resisting, when you let the music move through you, fear becomes nothing more than background percussion, not an enemy, just part of the composition. You are beginning to sense this now. That's why you're here. Not by accident, but by rhythm, by resonance. A tuning fork inside your soul vibrated at the exact frequency that guided you to these words. And now we begin. And so, my friend, as we continue wandering together through this strange and shimmering labyrinth of awareness, notice how the very act of listening begins to dissolve the tension within you. Not listening to me specifically, but listening to the space behind the words, the gaps, the silence, the way the sound rises and falls like a tide, revealing that every message worth hearing is never really in the words themselves, but in the emptiness that cradles them. That emptiness is where your mind begins to remember. It is no longer prey. There is a certain quality of presence that appears when one stops running from their own experience. You may feel it now, a subtle softening, like loosening a tight fist you didn't realize you'd been clenching for years. Fear is not something you defeat. It is something you stop contracting around. Imagine the mind as a muscle that has been tensed for so long that it forgot what relaxation felt like. When it finally releases even slightly, there is a kind of blissful weakness, but also a growing strength, like a stream thawing after a long winter. It becomes alive again. To be done being prey is not a declaration of war. It's the end of war. It is the moment the battlefield dissolves because the soldier has walked away, realizing the fight was a dream nourished by misunderstanding. When you see this clearly, there is nothing left to defend. And that, ironically, is when your true power unfolds. Not the rigid, armored power of the ego trying to control life, but the fluid, effortless power of consciousness dancing with itself. If you sit quietly for a moment, yes. Even now, as you read these words, you may notice a strange sensation, like the mind opening a window after ages of stale air. A fresh breeze flows in, the scenery changes. You realize you do not need to police every thought, every feeling, every flutter of emotion. They rise and fall on their own, like waves lapping against a shore that feels no need to hold them. You do not need to catch them, chase them, suppress them, or fear them. Thoughts are like guests at an inn. They arrive. They stay briefly, and eventually they wander off again, leaving the room exactly as it was before. Most of your suffering comes from trying to turn these visitors into permanent residents. But now the mind is beginning to unlearn that habit, like a bird who suddenly realizes the cage door has been open the whole time. You feel a curious mixture of wonder and amusement. How long you stayed inside? Believing the bars were solid. How real they seem. And yet they were only made of thought, very convincing thought, but thought nonetheless. The moment you see the cage for what it is, it melts. And then something extraordinary happens. Instead of escaping, you laugh. Because there is nowhere to escape to. You were never trapped. The cage was a mirage painted by fear. And fear was simply a misunderstanding of your own nature. We often imagine that awakening is the acquiring of some grand secret, some spiritual treasure buried deep beneath layers of complexity. But the truth is far more mischievous. Awakening is the loss of what never belonged to you in the first place, the loss of unnecessary fears, the loss of mistaken identities, the loss of the pressure to be anything other than what you are. In this exact moment, which is already perfectly complete, and here, in this gentle unraveling, the mind discovers it no longer wishes to be prey to its own expectations. Expectations are crafty hunters. They stalk you from the shadows, whispering what you should be, how fast you should grow, what others might think, what you must accomplish before the sun sets. They turn the present moment into a hostage, held at gunpoint by imaginary futures. But look closer. The gun is made of paper. The threat dissolves the moment you breathe deeply enough to see it. The breath, oh, what an extraordinary teacher. Always there, always faithful. always returning you to the truth. Each inhale is a birth. Ach exhale, assurande. Together, they form a rhythm older than civilization. If you follow this rhythm with your awareness, you begin to sense the flowing nature of everything. Feel the breath move through you, not as something you control, but as something that simply happens. You are not breathing, you are being breathed. Life is happening through you. You are the flute, not the flutist. The melody plays itself. And when you realize this, fear begins to look absurd. How can you fear life when life is the very thing looking through your eyes? How can you be prey when you are also the forest, the sky, the wind, and the vast silence in which everything appears, the moment this truth shimmers even faintly in your awareness? The old mechanisms of self-protection fall away like dry leaves. People spend years trying to toughen their minds, believing resilience is built by becoming hard. But hardness is brittle. What bends does not break. The mind that is flexible, like bamboo in the storm, survives every wind. The storm doesn't end because the bamboo resists. The bamboo survives precisely because it does not resist. Bent, sway, dance, do not cling. This is the way of the Tao. And though the Tao seems mysterious, it is the most natural movement of all. You are made of it, shaped by it, carried by it, even when you forget. If you truly listen, listen not with the ears, but with the whole being, you will begin to sense the dance beneath your thoughts, a subtle hum, like the background vibration of the universe. Everything flows, everything rises and falls. Everything plays its part in a cosmic symphony that is always improvising, always surprising, always perfect in its imperfection. And once you feel this, deeply and without effort, you find that the idea of being prey becomes laughable, because prey implies separation, and separation is the greatest illusion of all. You have never been separate from anything. The boundary between you and the world is a convenient fiction, useful for conversation but false in reality. You are made of stars, oxygen, ancient oceans, forgotten supernovas, the dust of galaxies. Everything that seems outside you was once inside you, and everything that seems inside you was once outside. The body you claim as mine is borrowed water, borrowed minerals, borrowed breath, borrowed stardust, and the mind you defend is a temporary swirl of awareness in an infinite field. Who is the prey here? Who is the hunter? Where does one begin and the other end? It is all one movement, one process, one dance. And when you feel this not as an idea, but as a direct, almost physical sense of merging, the mind stops trying to protect itself from life. Instead, it begins to let life pass through it like wind through open hands. This openness is what gives birth to clarity, not the clarity of perfect answers, but the clarity of freedom from needing them. In this freedom, something wonderfully strange happens. You start enjoying your own consciousness, not in a narcissistic way, but in the same way a musician enjoys playing with sound, or a painter enjoys watching colors bleed together on canvas. You become fascinated by the movement of thoughts, the textures of emotion, the sensations of being alive. Everything becomes interesting because you are no longer trying to control the experience. You are simply experiencing it. This is the mind that has retired from being prey, not because it has defeated anything, but because it has realized there was nothing to defeat. The shadows were always cast by its own light, and now that it sees this, it relaxes into itself, like a wave sinking back into the sea. And here you are, reading these words not as instructions, but as reflections of what you already know. I am not teaching you anything new. I am reminding you of something ancient, something you have always sensed in quiet moments, in dreams, in the stillness between breaths. The truth is not hidden, it is too close to see, closer than your thoughts, closer than your heartbeat, closer than your identity. It is the you that watches the you, the awareness behind all awareness, the I behind the mind, and that, my friend, is why you are no longer prey. As we drift a little deeper into this ocean of awareness, notice how the contours of your experience begin to change, not because you are forcing them to, but because the very act of observing them with softness alters their gravity. We often think change requires effort, disciplina, some heroic spiritual ascent. But true transformation happens in the same way dawn arrives, gradually, gently, without ever rushing. The mind that is done being prey does not yank itself into awakening. It simply stops arguing with the morning. There is a sweetness in this kind of surrender, not the surrender of defeat, but the surrender of alignment, like a leaf finally relaxing into the wind instead of trying to navigate the forest on its own. And when you begin to move with life rather than against it, an extraordinary harmony emerges. You start noticing that every moment, even the ones you once labeled as obstacles, carries a certain rhythm. Every emotion has a tempo. Every thought has a tone. Every experience has a color and a shape, swirling within you like an inner watercolor painting that never dries. When the mind stops being prey, it begins to see that even its fears were part of this art, brushstrokes of shadow that give depth to the whole canvas. Imagine a painting with no darkness, no contrast. It would be flat, meaningless. Your fears and your doute, your anxieties have been contouring your inner world for years, giving it texture and dimension. But now, instead of clinging to those shadows as truths, you see them as passing clouds. The sky itself remains vast and unchanged. What does it mean to no longer be prey? It means the sky realizes it is sky, not the clouds drifting through it. And perhaps you are beginning to feel this in your chest, a spaciousness, not dramatic or explosive, but subtle, like air moving through curtains on a warm afternoon. This spaciousness is not something you must cultivate. It appears the moment you stop crowding it with resistance. Resistance compresses consciousness into tight spaces, making the universe seem smaller than it is. But the moment resistance dissolves, perspective expands, thought loosens, and the self becomes more like a breeze than a brick. We spend so much of our lives trying to be solid, trying to be defined, trying to be consistent. But consistency is the longing of the ego, not the nature of the universe. The universe dances, it sways, it oscillates, everything changes, everything flows, everything participates in this endless cosmic movement. To insist on being fixed is to fight the entire symphony of existence. When you let yourself flow with that music, something miraculous happens. The concept of being prey becomes absurd. How can a melody be prey? How can a river be prey? These ideas only make sense when you think of yourself as isolated, separate, a lone creature navigating a dangerous world. But when you remember you are the world, its heartbeat, its breath, its consciousness, fear loses its purpose. Some people believe enlightenment is a kind of escape, as though one rises above humans and becomes immune to pain or confusion. But enlightenment is far more ordinary, far more intimate. It is not rising above life, it is sinking into it, fully, completely, without hesitation. It is letting the heart break when it breaks, letting it heal when it heals, letting it love when it loves. It is participating in the full spectrum of being without insisting that anything be other than it is. This kind of openness is not weakness. It is the greatest strength imaginable. Remember water. It seems gentle, but it carves mountains. It seems passive, but it carries ships across oceans. It seems yielding, but it cannot be destroyed. Fire can be put out, metal can rust, stone can shatter, but water simply changes form. That is the essence of a mind that is done being prey. It becomes like water, adaptable, curious, unafraid of shape or condition. And as you listen now, perhaps you can feel something in you flowing, not toward a destination, not toward a goal, but simply flowing because that is its nature. Consciousness is always in motion, even when you sit perfectly still. The universe within you is humming, vibrating, breathing. Every atom in your body is dancing. You are a symphony pretending to be a single note. When the illusion of smallness dissolves, the music begins to sound different. You may notice moments where the mind tries to reclaim its old patterns, little echoes of doubt, the faint rumble of anxiety, the familiar tightness of old fears. But instead of treating them as threats, you can now watch them with curiosity, like watching ripples form and fade on the surface of a pond. The ripples don't disturb the pond's depth. They never could. Your awareness is that depth. And here is a beautiful secret awareness. Does not need to eliminate the ripples. It simply needs to remember it is the pond. For most of your life, you were trained to identify with the ripples. Each thought, each worry, each projection becoming a defining feature of who you believed yourself to be. But the more deeply you recognize the spaciousness underneath, the more easily you stop mistaking momentary disturbances for permanent truths. Imagine sitting under a tree on a warm evening. A breeze passes, rustling the leaves. You don't say, "The tree is broken," when the branches sway. You understand that movement is natural. The same is true for your inner world. Thoughts move, feelings move, energy moves. Nothing is wrong. Nothing is broken. Nothing needs to be hunted or defended against. Life is simply breathing through you. And here's the most delightful revelation in all of this. You were never hunted by the world. You were hunted by your own misunderstanding. The world is not out to get you. The universe is not conspiring against you. On the contrary, it has been conspiring for you, nudging you deeper into awareness every time you ran from your own shadow. Each fear was a doorway. Each worry was a teacher. Each moment of confusion was a gentle tug pulling you back toward your own nature. The mind that is done being prey sees this clearly. It sees that nothing was ever attacking it. The only enemy was the belief in separation. And once that belief thins, the whole structure of fear collapses like a house of cards. What remains is not invincibility, but freedom. Freedom not from pain, but from drowning in it. Freedom not from uncertainty, but from being enslaved by it. Freedom not from life, but from the illusion that life is something happening to you rather than through you. If you sit with this, even for a moment, you may feel the boundaries of your identity begin to soften. You might feel less like a person and more like a presence, less like an isolated mind and more like an atmosphere. It is gentle, but profound. This is not detachment. It is intimacy of the highest form, intimacy with all that is. You see, a mind that is no longer prey does not retreat from the world. It falls in love with it, fiercely, playfully, without condition. It laughs more easily. It cries more freely. It forgives with less effort. It lives with the kind of fearlessness that does not come from power, but from belonging. Belonging to everything, to the wind, to the sky, to the stars, to the mystery. And now, perhaps you feel that belonging too. A Kiat homecoming, a return not to a place, but to yourself, the self that existed before fear, before identity, before memory, before name, the self that is made of nothing and everything at once. That self cannot be prey. That self is the predator of illusions. That self is the watcher of the mind. That self is the dance. And as we drift into the final stretch of this winding river of awareness, notice how the journey itself begins to disappear. Not because it ends, but because you begin to see that there was never a beginning or an ending, only a continuous unfolding. Life is not a straight line, it is a spiral, curving inward and outward, revealing different facets of the same truth with each turn. What you call awakening is merely the moment you realize you were always spiraling, always flowing, always participating in this great cosmic unfolding. If you're seeing this, perhaps something in you is already dissolving into this realization, not dramatically, not with fireworks, but with the quiet inevitability of a drop falling into the sea. And the drop does not lose itself, it becomes the sea. That is what is happening to your mind. It is becoming spacious enough to stop being prey to itself. All the while, life remains gloriously, mischievously ordinary. Beard still chirp, people still cut you off in traffic. Your emotions still rise and fall like unpredictable weather. Enlightenment doesn't remove the storms. It reveals you were never the storm. You are the sky watching the storm. You are the space in which everything appears anger, joy, the sorrow, laughter, and none of it sticks. None of it owns you. None of it hunts you. When you recognize yourself as this space, this awareness, this quiet witnessing presence, you become uncatchable. Thoughts come and go, but they no longer define you. Fear arises, but it no longer dominates you. You may feel sadness or uncertainty, but they pass through you like wind through a bamboo grove, whistling, bending, but never breaking anything essential. There is a profound relief in this, a kind of cosmic exhale. You stop gripping life so tightly. You stop gripping yourself so tightly. The ego relaxes its claws. The body loosens. The breath becomes natural again. You begin to trust the river instead of fighting its current. And the river has always known where to go. People often ask, how do I let go? And I always smile gently, because the question contains its own answer. Letting go is not something you do. It is something that happens when you stop trying. Just as a hand opens naturally when it gets tired of clenching, the mind loosens when it gets tired of holding its illusions. And something in you right now is tired, not exhausted in the sense of defeat, but tired in the way a traveler becomes tired of wandering in circles, tired enough to sit down, tired enough to be still, tired enough to look inward and notice that all the searching has been for something that was never lost. And in that stillness, something beautiful reveals itself, a sense of humor. You begin to see how absurdly serious you once were about things that were never solid to begin with. You laugh not at yourself, but at the grand cosmic comedy of it all. You laugh because life is funny, because consciousness is playful, because the universe is not a stern judge, but an improvisational dancer. You laugh because you finally realize that no part of your suffering ever diminished your essence, not even once. The drama felt real. The fear felt real. The heartbreak felt real, but none of it touched the core of you. It touched your story, not your essence. And essence cannot be hunted. It cannot be threatened. It cannot be broken. How can the ocean be hurt by a storm on its surface? How can the sky be harmed by a passing cloud? when the mind realizes this, it relaxes into its own vastness. You feel it now, perhaps more deeply than before, a gentle widening, a subtle softening, like the soul stretching after a long sleep. And in this widening, fears lose their teeth, not because they vanish, but because they no longer have anything to bite. Think of your mind as a vast room. For years, you lived in a tiny corner, convinced the walls were close, but now you've begun to explore. You've opened doors, you've walked down hallways, you've discovered that the room is bigger than you imagined, so big it has no edges. And in this spaciousness, old threats shrink into insignificance. A shadow on a cave wall no longer terrifies you. Once you step into the light and see its true size, this is the power of awareness, not the power to crush fear, but the power to reveal it. When fear is seen clearly, it becomes transparent. It becomes insubstantial. You can walk right through it. And perhaps you are beginning to sense that transparency now, a gentle dissolving, quiet liberation, not from the world, but from the way you once interpreted it. The mind, done being prey, sees everything differently, not through the lens of survival, but through the lens of curiosity. Fear becomes interesting instead of overwhelming. Emotions become sensations instead of threats. Life becomes a dance instead of a battlefield. You become playful again, like a child who has rediscovered the joy of simply being alive. And perhaps this is the true meaning of awakening: a return to play, a return to wonder, a return to the simplicity of existence before the mind complicated it with its narratives. Adults believe they are mature because they worry. But true maturity is the ability to live with openness, vulnerability, and joy, to step into the unknown without needing to conquer it. The universe loves this kind of openness. When you move through life this way, everything begins to feel like an invitation. Even the challenges, even the chaos. You begin to see that life is not something you need to control, but something you can trust. And trust is the moment prey becomes participant. Trust is the moment the hunted becomes the dancer. Imagine for a moment that your consciousness is a flame. The wind blows, shadows flicker, shapes appear and disappear on the walls. But the flame remains untouched by the shadows it casts. Your mind is that flame. Your thoughts are the shadows. When you realize this, you stop being afraid of your own imagination. You stop being afraid of yourself. And this is freedom. Freedom is not the end of fear, but the end of identification with fear. Freedom is seeing fear as a wave in the ocean rather than an attack. Freedom is recognizing that every emotion, no matter how intense, is simply life passing through you, not something you are obligated to obey. And so you return again and again to this truth. Nothing in you needs defending. Not your worth, not your identity, not your place in the world. You belong here simply because you exist. That is the only qualification life ever required. Once you truly feel this belonging deep in the bones, deep in the breath, you stop living like prey. You stop shrinking. You stop bracing for impact. You stop tiptoeing through existence as if life is a trap. You begin to walk with softness, confidence, ease. Not the confidence of ego, but the confidence of being, the confidence of water flowing downhill, the confidence of a tree reaching toward the sun, the confidence of a wave remembering it is the sea. And that is the invitation. Life offers you now not to be strong, not to be fearless, not to be perfect, but to be real, to be present, to be awake, to breathe deeply and let the dance move through you. For in the end, there is nothing hunting you. There is only life inviting you to join the dance. There is only awareness guiding you gently home. There is only the great cosmic laughter, echoing softly through your being, reminding you that you were never prey, only dreaming you were. And now, perhaps the dream is ending, and the awakening begins.